Monopoly. Monopoly was patented by Charles Darrow in 1935 and went on to become the best-selling game in the United States, as well as in many other countries. Hold the applause for Mr. Darrow. The idea for the game was not original. He borrowed it from earlier variations, and then he got lucky. Homemade buying and selling games, most often played by college students, were first created in the 1890s. None were commercial successes. None were patented. No doubt influenced by these early games, Lizzie Magie, a young woman from Virginia, devised her own version at the beginning of the 20th century, the landlord's game. In 1904, she had it patented. The similarities between her game and the later Monopoly cannot be dismissed. They both had 40 spaces, including 4 railroads, 2 utilities, and 22 pieces of property for sale. Additionally, there were spaces for jail, luxury tax, and free parking. Though similar in layout, the purpose of Magie's game was the opposite of Monopoly's. Maggie, a Quaker, created her game as a fun way to teach the evils of monopolies, of one person or company taking almost everything while the rest get almost nothing. Maggie clearly explains this in her written introduction to the game, and the rules and board are designed specifically to get her message across. For example, all rent is put into the public treasury, college is free, and players are encouraged to share their winnings with others if they become wealthy. 30 years later, Charles Darrow entered the picture. He claimed to be the inventor of Monopoly, but in truth, he borrowed heavily from Lizzie Magie's game. During the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, banks and businesses failed worldwide, leaving millions of people jobless and penniless. In the United States alone, thousands lost their homes, many died from cold and starvation, great numbers of people wandered the country seeking food, shelter, clothing, and jobs. They traveled on foot and by freight train and lived in camps called hobo jungles. Charles Darrow of Germantown, Pennsylvania, had it better than most. Though he had lost his job, heating equipment salesman, he and his wife had managed to hold on to their house. Charles made what he could performing odd jobs. Mostly he repaired things, toasters, washing machines, and other electrical appliances. He also walked dogs. They were barely getting by when Darrow learned his wife was expecting their second child. Trying to find a way to make more money and fill his many empty hours, Darrow made toys. He devised an improved score pad for the game of bridge. He made jigsaw puzzles. He even invented a bat and ball toy for use at the beach. When none of these sold, he turned his attention to creating a board game. After all, board games were becoming increasingly popular as a result of the Depression. Live theater, movies, and other forms of entertainment were simply too expensive. But board games, then called parlor games, did not cost a great deal and could be played over and over. In fact, playing board games was the main form of entertainment for the Darrows and their family and friends. As a kid, Darrow had played the landlord's game. Now he decided to make his own version. Relying greatly on Maggie's game, he made a prototype of the game of Monopoly out of a linoleum sheet. On it, he painted property squares and gave them the names of real places in Atlantic City, New Jersey, which was his family's favorite vacation spot. Park Place, Ventnor Avenue, and the Boardwalk, for example, were all places that Darrow knew well. Darrow's family and friends loved playing the game of Monopoly on the homemade board. It took their minds off their problems, and it gave them a make-believe way to have money and buy property, things the Depression had made impossible in real life. Soon others wanted their own boards. At $4 a piece, Darrow began making copies for friends and friends of friends. He painted the game boards using free paint samples. With scraps of discarded wood from a lumber yard, he carved houses and hotels. On thick, stiff paper, he typed up title cards for the properties. Buyers bought their own dice, tokens, and packages of play money. Though Darrow didn't do any advertising, word spread, and he was soon getting orders from all over the country. Working at top speed, Darrow could produce 2 complete games a day. A friend helped by printing the title cards and game boards. This increased production to 6 a day. But Darrow could not supply the ever-rising demand. In 1934, Darrow worked out an agreement with the same friend to print and package complete sets. Darrow would continue making the wooden houses and hotels. Under this arrangement, up to 25 sets could be made a day. For several months, the problem was solved and production kept up with sales. Soon, however, 25 games a day was not enough. More requests were coming in from friends and friends of friends for the handmade game, far more than the partners could possibly produce. Darrow knew he had to take Monopoly to a professional game manufacturer. He wrote to Parker Brothers and sent them a copy of his game. There, brothers George and Charles Parker test played Monopoly and gave it a unanimous thumbs down. One executive wrote, "The concept is dull, the action slow-paced, and the rules hopelessly complex." Another said, "It will never sell. The game contains 52 fundamental errors." Despite this response, Darrow didn't give up. He went from town to town and from store to store looking for one that would carry his game. No one was interested until the day he met with the manager of Wanamaker's department store in Chicago. To Darrow's surprise, the manager had one of the original handmade copies of the game at home and loved playing it. Eagerly, he agreed to stock Monopoly on his shelves. With money earned from earlier sales and the rest borrowed from family and friends, Darrow and a handful of employees made 5,000 sets. At Wanamaker's, Monopoly was a hit from the start. Almost immediately, it became the fastest-selling game in the store. Hearing about the game's success, the executives at Parker Brothers realized that despite the game's so-called 52 fundamental errors, they were the ones making the mistake. In 1935, they contacted Monopoly's inventor and purchased the rights to make and sell the game, with a large share of the profits going to Charles Darrow. In 1936, Parker Brothers sold every set they could manufacture and were bombarded with orders for more. As the Christmas season approached, orders were coming in so fast the games had to be stacked and stored in hallways. Charles Darrow became a multi-millionaire and retired at the age of 46 to become a gentleman farmer in the Pennsylvania countryside. As for George and Charles Parker, Monopoly literally saved them from financial ruin. The truth is, the company had been on the verge of bankruptcy in the early 1930s, right about the time that Darrow happened along with what turned out to be the biggest money-making game in history. Before Monopoly, Charles Darrow made other board games, none of which he was ever able to sell or manufacture in significant numbers. Despite their incredible success, the company's top executives decided that Monopoly was just a fad, one that wouldn't last more than 3 years. In December 1936, company president George Parker ordered the manufacturing of Monopoly to cease absolutely. "We will stop making Monopoly against the possibility of a very early slump." But sales of the game had never been higher. To quit making a top-selling game made no sense at all. Before the brakes could be put on production, George Parker changed his mind. While Darrow made a fortune on the game, Lizzie Magie, the original patent holder, made next to nothing. Monopoly is popular around the world and available in 19 languages.